Welcome to your essential business briefing. I'm Stephen Carroll. Coming up, as China turns the screw on its tech giants, we're asking what's driving the crackdown and what it means for companies and consumers. Can high-speed rail supercharge a local economy? We'll be examining the TGV effect as the French train service turns 40. And we'll report on efforts by French towns to entice new businesses into vacant shops. Tencent, Alibaba, Didi and the Ant Group, some of the biggest names in technology, now all facing increased scrutiny from Chinese regulators. In March of this year, President Xi promised to rein in major internet platforms in the name of fairer competition and data protection. Since then, we've seen a crackdown on sectors as diverse as online gaming, payments and ride-hailing. So what does all of this mean then for companies and consumers in China? Let's speak now to Martin Chorzempa, who's an expert in this area. He's a senior fellow at the Petersen Institute for International Economics. Martin, thanks for being with us. Can you set the scene for us? How big a regulatory sweep has this been that we've seen in China in recent months?
Well, this has really remade the whole way that internet companies deal with the government in China. For a long time, I've called it a Wild West within an authoritarian system, where outside of censorship, these companies were pretty much free to do whatever they wanted in terms of not reporting their acquisitions, their use of data. There were relatively limited restrictions, and they were able to get around the restrictions that were there. But now the political line has shifted, especially after Jack Ma's disastrous speech back in October of last year, and the crackdown has extended to just about every aspect of internet companies' businesses, from competition to data protection and much more.
Remind us, what was it that Jack Ma said that upset the Communist Party leaders so much?
Essentially, he criticized that they were focusing too much on risk and not enough on innovation, and made some pretty incendiary comments. And what the ultimate reaction was that a recognition that the entrepreneurs in China had gained so much power that they felt that they could directly and publicly take on the party and tell them that they were implementing their goals in the wrong way. And that led to a reaction all the way up to the top of the Politburo, all the way to Xi Jinping himself. And they decided that there was a crackdown was absolutely necessary.
A lot of the rules that we're seeing kind of talked about in terms of competition and data protection, these are things that in other parts of the world, in the European Union, in the United States, there are already rules in place. Is China in some ways just playing catch up with the structures that exist elsewhere, or is this very different?
I think it's very different. China wants to chart what they view as a middle ground. They think that GDPR in Europe is far too restrictive and has harmed the innovative capacity of European companies. And they think that the US is a bit of a free-for-all. I actually find that much of what China is doing is actually quite innovative and interesting and worth referencing, because they're getting really deep into the ways that, say, algorithms affect the way that people interact with internet platforms, the kind of deep, detailed regulation that we haven't really seen from other countries. In the U.S., a lot of the crackdowns, and it hasn't really been a crackdown, I would say, but actually much of the response in the U.S. has been railing against these companies, but not actually doing very much about it in terms of how they operate.
So what's the Chinese government's goal then, do you think?
I think one piece of it is to ensure that, as they call it, the disorderly expansion of capital doesn't continue, which essentially means limited the power of entrepreneurs to push back against the party. But a good portion of it is actually the same kind of motivation that motivates European and American governments and others around the world, which is they actually want their people not to have be constantly exposed to scams and cybercrime, and they want a competitive market where young startups can thrive and not be crushed by big incumbents. A lot of these are actually quite laudable and reasonable, and the actions that they're taking are formulated by often pretty smart technocrats who have thought very deeply about these issues.
What sort of effect is it going to have on these big companies? We're used to, companies like Alibaba and Tencent being absolutely massive in the areas they work in. Are they going to look very different when this regulatory change is done?
I don't think they're going to look ultimately that different. My anticipation is that pieces of their businesses will be carved off where there's viewed as a conflict of interest. For example, lending is now viewed as something that has to be separate from Alibaba's financial affiliates super app. But other than that, I think there's going to be more interconnection between these apps. You're going to be able to finally send a link to a competitor's website through a chat, which you couldn't do until recently. And I anticipate that the big guys will continue to dominate the space, but that there might be a little more room for more innovative incumbents. The area to watch for that might be much more worrying is if they have to hand over data in large amounts to the government, which seems to be a piece of the current regulatory push as well.
Is there much then for consumers to worry about in all of this?
I don't think so. I think consumers probably will end up getting potentially better deals. One of the recent rules bans discrimination based on algorithms, so they can't, look at you using an iPhone and decide to charge you more because they think you have more money. I think it might actually be better for consumers. For example, everybody uses WeChat, but you couldn't send a link to buy something on Taobao, Alibaba's e-commerce platform, because they made all sorts of excuses about it. Now it's actually going to be easier for people to, as these platforms interoperate better.
Is there any chance that with a greater regulatory oversight that they could actually open the door for opportunities, perhaps for some of the foreign tech companies that aren't really operating that much in China? Are they going to get any way in through this?
I highly doubt it. I think any probability that they were going to be able to enter already low has gone down as a result of this. Much of the concerns in this crackdown have been the potential for American regulators to get access to sensitive data on Chinese people through the process of listing in New York. And so I don't think that the Chinese government is remotely interested in Facebook and Google harnessing any sensitive data on Chinese people.
Okay, Martin Chorzempa from the Petersen Institute for International Economics. Thank you very much for joining us. Now, it's been 40 years since the launch of France's high-speed rail service, the TGV. The national train company, SNCF, is marking the birthday at a time when the service is facing new challenges from a slump in business travel and imminent private competition. Nonetheless, many communities around France are still lobbying hard for a high-speed rail link and the significant economic boost that it can bring. Kate Moody's here with more on this. Kate, what does being connected to the TGV mean for a local economy?
Well, Stephen, it's a link to Paris and beyond via other air and rail services. A report from the 1980s outlines a number of potential advantages, including more industrial activity, more tourism, and a boost to local real estate. To some degree, those predictions did come true. France's National Statistics Agency says the TGV era has allowed companies to reorganize their workforce and become more competitive. In the first 10 years of the 40-minute TGV route connecting Paris to Reims, the city reported more than 200 companies putting down roots there, creating 8,000 new jobs and injecting over 660 million euros into the local economy.
Is the TGV effect as relevant today?
Well, the results are a little bit less clear-cut. Strasbourg, for example, has seen a far more muted bounce. Analysis shows that a TGV line alone isn't enough. It also requires significant financial investment on both a local and national level. Property prices in Bordeaux jumped 20% in the months after its TGV line was upgraded in 2017, but that was coupled with a broader investment in revamping the city centre. Better internet access and, more recently, more remote working have changed some of the reasons for travel. TGV lines still offer a real boost for the tourism industry, and growing concerns about the environmental impact of travel do give trains the edge over other forms of transport.
What's in the future of high-speed rail in France?
Well, France's national rail operator is expanding its network. The high-speed tracks don't currently cover much of the country. As you can see on this map, they largely focus on connecting cities to Paris and not necessarily to each other. New lines are being planned and old ones need upgrades, so maintenance work is pretty much open-ended. Since December 2020, private operators have been able to apply to run services on high-speed lines, bringing a potential new source of revenue, and down the track, that could reshape the network.
Okay, Kate Moody, thank you very much. Next to a challenge facing urban communities in many parts of the world, how to revive town centres when businesses have shut down. The French government is spending billions on its action plan for towns with investment in housing, transport and commercial spaces. Brian Quinn reports now on efforts by two communities to attract new retailers.
Downtown shops gone out of business one after another. The village of Vergès in southern France has lost count. In 15 years, 3/4 of the stores on this street have shut down. To lure new tenants, the owner of this former tobacco shop has done a complete renovation. The local government has also convinced him to lower his rent by €150.
We don't want to be a ghost town. Bringing back energy, life, shops, this is a very important challenge.
Vergès is also offering commercial leases on a trial basis, a low-risk option that convinced this young fashion entrepreneur to take the plunge.
It's a 6-month renewable lease. A standard commercial lease is 2 years minimum. And since I started during the pandemic, it was less stressful to begin with a short-term commitment.
Some 150 French communities are trying the same tactic, and it's in France's least populated region, Lozère, that the concept is having the most success. Here in downtown Mende, in less than 5 years, the number of shuttered shops has been reduced by half.
A few years ago, our downtown still had around 15% of commercial space vacant. Since then, by working with shopkeepers on this revitalization project, we've reached around 6%.
This shopkeeper turned her trial boutique permanent, then moved to a location twice the size. Some 50 others like her have gone permanent here as well. On average, 80% of participants make it to the end of their trial period.
That's it from us for now, but you can watch back all of our previous shows on the France 24 website. Plus, we're on social media if you want to get in touch with your comments and questions. Until next time, thanks for watching.
La medida de Trócoli veut dire beaucoup pour les lapidants.
Bienvenidos a las noticias de France 24.
Thanks very much for joining us. أهلا بكم في ثقافة في عدد اليوم.
Ravi de vous retrouver pour Afrique Hebdo. Au programme cette semaine.
نسمع بين حين والآخر. This storm has hit New York City a lot.
To be a president. 3, 2, 1.
Madagascar fait face à une seconde vague meurtrière.
Almost 99 million of you watch us every week. So thank you.
شكرا.
Gracias. Your confidence means a lot to us.
Muchas gracias.
شكرا على هذه الثقة.
Thank you.
Merci du fond de mon cœur.
Liberté, égalité, actualité.